You can't hold me back, you can't hold me down. Put me in the game, gotta get it right now. You can't hold me back, you can't hold me down. Put me in the game, gotta get it right now. Whoa, on me, you know I'm the one and only. All them other ones is phony. Moving like a drum, I'm on beat. Whoa, yeah, you could put the pressure.
Hello and welcome to Grace on Audacity with Andrena. I am your host, Andrena, and I appreciate you stopping by for today's conversation. If you are new to Grace and Audacity, this is a platform where we do a lot of cultural commentary, but from a Christian perspective. So some weeks I talk about trending topics, sometimes I might just talk about lifestyle things or things that just pique my interest. This week, we're going to take a little bit of a break from, the direction we were heading in the last 2 weeks, where we were talking about Christian influencer culture stuff and things that I just, have a really strong conviction about. Side note, if you're new to the channel, I am new to YouTube, so be gracious. Be gracious with me. But I'm also shaping this platform too. I say that to say I'm shaping a platform. So it's going in a bunch of different directions. But trust me, there is a method to the madness, so to speak. Anyway, we're taking a little break, but we are going to talk about something that I saw trending earlier this week, which would be last week by now, by the time this goes out. And this was an interview that Simone did with her best friend. And Simone is an influencer. I think she's veering in the direction of becoming a Christian influencer because, she talks about her faith in God a little bit. But she did an interview with her best friend where her best friend was saying the last year was really rough for her. So I think she said she got evicted from her apartment, her car was repossessed, had to move back in with her parents, and, just talked about a lot of struggles. And a lot of social media, a lot of responses on social media were talking about how, as this woman is pouring out her heart, Simone's response was, oh my gosh, she just kept saying Jesus, Jesus over again in disbelief. And her friend was essentially saying, I was going through a really hard time. And what made it harder for me was the fact that I watched you help other people, but you could not help me. Right. And I thought that was a really interesting exchange because that's not something that's talked about a lot in adult friendships, right? Where we talk about a sense of entitlement versus support. So, where do we draw the line? Now, I've been on both sides. I've been on the side of desperately needing help and asking for help and people not being able to help me. And as a result, other times desperately being in need of help and not wanting to ask for help because I was too ashamed, right? Or I feared their rejection or their responses. I've also been on the other side where I've been in position to help someone and they asked so many times that it started to feel like they were taking advantage, right? And that resentment kind of skewed my ability to help them and to objectively look at the situation. So, for example, someone who was like chronically in a predicament that I was just like, at some point, this has to stop, but not realizing that there were other factors that had to be addressed. So it wasn't as black and white in the instance that I'm thinking of just quit it, just do better, right? There was mental health assistance that was needed. There was a lack of family support in some ways. And so, I've been on the side of being the person that was repeatedly asked for help in the same ways. And it all begs the question, right? In adult friendships, because this is not talked about a lot, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between entitlement and support? And my short answer is I don't think it's always black and white. I don't think it's always black and white. Now, as a believer, and this is what I mean by Christian commentary, I strongly believe in the reality of spiritual warfare, right? So I've seen in situations, feel free to disagree, where even in my life, in my family, where there was a cycle of a certain type of loss. For me, let me just speak for myself. I'm not going to speak on behalf of other people. There was a cycle of like financial loss. I remember a season where it would literally feel like I would get money and it would come out from the other side of my hands. And this was at a point in my life where I had not really considered giving and tithing, and that had not been a priority in my life. But one of the ways that I believe that that stronghold, and this is what I mean by spiritual warfare, was broken in my life, was by getting into the habit of prioritizing giving, right? So whether that was the absolute 10% or more via tithing, or making sure that even if money was short and I didn't even have enough to tithe, right? Like by the time auto deduct, came out of my bank account, there was less than 10% left, at least giving right? Or just being intentional about that in some ways. That's when I started to see a change around in my finances. And not to say that everything financially is just perfect, because there's still seasons where I'm like, God, I need a miracle. But there was definitely a shift. I'm sharing that to say, I don't know if the line is always black and white. When you factor in things like spiritual warfare, when you factor in circumstantial things, right? Like being a single mother who has to take care of three kids plus yourself, and you look at like, what you're bringing in versus the expenses that are demanding on you, you can't always just say to someone, just stop spending money and you'll earn more, or just get a better paying job and life will instantly change. I do think, though, that the question of entitlement versus support calls for a few things that nobody talks about, that we don't talk about enough. One being the need for boundaries, right? I grew up as a people pleaser, not because of my environment at home, but just kind of, I think the natural way that I'm wired is I like to see people happy. I am the hostess that sits in the corner and watches people and watch my guests make jokes and eat all the good food. And when they're leaving, I pack to go plates. Like that's who I am. And so being like a recovering people person, boundaries was real people pleaser. Boundaries were really hard for me in some ways. But the older you get, the more you realize that other people infringing on your boundaries as a result of you not communicating your boundaries is your fault, right? It's your fault. It's not their fault. Now, when somebody infringes on your boundaries, although you've made it clear, that's a different topic. But if someone repeatedly, right, is asking for ways, is not doing what they need to build themselves up, and that's an infringement of your boundary, then you have the responsibility to say, my boundary is that I can only help but so far. My boundary is I can only go but so far. My boundary is that I will give it to you this first time, but don't come back to me and ask me a second or a third time. In adult friendships, communication is key. And there's so many times, I think, as women, right? Men, if you're watching, where we fail to communicate because we're stuck in the patterns from like our teenagers, our adolescents, and we have not matured, and so our expectations have not matured. In the B Simone conversation, it was clear to me, I don't know about anybody else, that there was a misalignment of expectations where the best friend kept saying, you helped everybody else. And so to me, what that says is that B. Simone has a tendency to want to help people. And perhaps with this particular friend, she had drawn the line and perhaps she did not communicate that. So that's the first thing, right? In adult friendships, I think it's really important to establish your boundaries, know yourself well enough to know what your boundaries are, first of all, but then be intentional about your communication of your expectations around your boundaries. And then the other thing I think that's really important is discernment, right? Discernment. There is no one size approach that fits all. There's a particular person in my life where I know if something happens, they're the one person that I can call. And if I call them and I say, let's say I need, $1,000, if they have it, they'll likely just cash app it to me, Zell it to me, whatever. And then a few days later ask, what did you need that for anyway? But they'll just do it just because, they trust that if I'm asking, it's because I'm in desperate need of it. Right. It's not always like that with everybody. There are some people that you need a favor from, and you got to jump through 1,000 hoops just to get them to help you. And this is where I think sensitivity or discernment in this case comes in. Because discernment says, I can be postured for the offense, right? Of you always asking me and needing my help as a friend. Or I can be sensitive to the fact that there might be something else going on. In adult friendship, discernment is so important. The spirit of offense, this is kind of as an aside, I think runs so rampant in our communities, in our churches, in our small groups. At the slightest infraction, someone is ready to like call it quits. People will literally quit churches, going to church, period, or leave their church because of like an offense that they never even talk to anybody about. And when we do that, it feels good. It feels like we're taking ownership of like our space, right? Like we're being self-aware. But I think that that's indicative of it's almost like a trauma response, right? Where you're offended but you're expecting somebody else to be able to read your mind, and they're just that's just impossible, right? So when it comes to, adult friendships and navigating the difference between entitlement and support, I think discernment plays a key role where we're able to communicate and say, this works, this doesn't work, I can help you this time, I can't help you this time. And then three, I feel like consistency, right, in relationships. Community is so much more than transactional. Sometimes when we have extreme situations like what we're seeing with B Simone and her friend right now, like you can say and just boil the entire friendship down to she always needs my help, right? I'm always helping her. And when we work in those absolutes, like we lose a sense of what community is supposed to be. Because yes, those things stand out, right? The time I needed your help with my rent, the time I needed your help with my car note, those things, right? They're gonna be amplified in our minds because of whatever feelings, come up or associated with those issues. But what about the time where we just went to the beach? What about the time where we watched a TV show together and we just laughed about it for like 30 minutes? What about the fact that you went to my little sister's graduation? Right? The things that were not transactional and it was just us being. Um, when we get into this like extreme of like, she always needs me or I'm always helping her, I think we diminish what community and relationships and friendships are supposed to be. Now, as we get older, it becomes obvious that life is like really fragile, right? It's really, really fragile. You know, you don't know what's around the corner. And my church right now is going through the book of James, and today we wrapped up the series with chapter 4. And toward the end of chapter 4, James is saying you don't know what tomorrow holds. You're not in control, right? You're not in control. And the one thing that's clear is that the more aware you become of how fragile life is, the more aware you become of how much you need people, how much you need friends, you need family. To anybody else that's watching that's unmarried, like like the feeling of like loneliness and isolation sometimes it's like amplified times 10. Not saying that married people don't go through that. And so like the need for like community and relationship and having people that are dependable is you're even more like attuned to that. So as we're navigating the issues of entitlement and boundaries, I think it's important to have a multidimensional approach or view of what relationships should be. Is a natural part of the process a point where I will need you, that there will come a point where I'll need you? Absolutely. But I do that with grace, right? And this is kind of to sum it up. But as I'm discerning enough, right? As I'm considering circumstantial things enough, I'll do that for you because I know that in the continuum of life, right, there might come a point where you'll have to do that for me. And that is the nature of relationship. And even if neither one of us is at a transactional point at financial transactional, favor transactions, like even if we don't get to that point ever in the near future, there's still like the steady pace of just doing life. Just doing life. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Those were my thoughts about it for this week, but I'd love to hear what you think about that interview and how you're navigating adult friendships, right? Especially when it comes to entitlement versus support. All right. Have a blessed rest of your week. Thank you for joining this conversation. And I always forget to say this part, but if you have not already, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe. All right. God bless you.
The pressure on me, I ain't never getting cold feet. Straight tide where I'm gon' be. I got no time to debate. I put my reps in like every day. I keep it moving, I don't like the way. I just keep adding these wins to the plate. I ain't worried about a setback.